She wasn't better than you, she was simply different. And that difference had nothing to do with your worth. Let that really sink in. You gave him your time, your attention, your energy, and maybe even a piece of your heart. And then in the end, he chose someone else. That kind of decision can hurt in a way that is difficult to explain. It feels like more than a breakup. It can feel like rejection at the deepest level, almost as if someone has silently told you that you weren't enough. But here is the truth that many people are afraid to say out loud. Being replaced does not mean you were missing something. It means he made a choice based on his own needs, his own confusion, his own fears, or even his ego. His decision is not a measurement of your value, and what hurts the most may not even be losing him. Sometimes what hurts is losing the picture you had created in your mind of what the relationship was supposed to become. You imagined a future, you imagined security, you imagined that all the effort would eventually lead somewhere beautiful, and suddenly that picture disappears. So your mind starts searching for an explanation. You replay conversations. You analyze every message. You wonder what you said wrong. You look at her and ask yourself what she has that you don't. But that cycle isn't closure. It's emotional exhaustion disguised as an attempt to understand. And if you keep going down that road, you may spend months trying to solve a question that was never about your worth in the first place. Maybe right now you want answers. You want to understand why he could walk away. You want to know why someone else seemed easier for him to choose. You want closure because you believe that if you can just understand the reason, the pain will finally disappear. But I want to give you something stronger than closure. I want to give you clarity. Clarity that his decision does not define who you are. Clarity that love is not proven by who stays after you have begged them to stay. Real love is shown by someone who recognizes your value and chooses to honor it. So if you are sitting in the middle of the pain of being replaced, hold on to this one truth. You were never supposed to compete for a permanent place in someone's heart. You should not have to outperform another woman to be loved. You should not have to become prettier, quieter, easier, more mysterious, or more convenient just to convince someone to choose you. When something is genuine, you don't have to constantly earn your position. You don't have to chase every ounce of attention. You don't have to prove that you deserve basic care. The right connection will stand beside you instead of forcing you to run after it. And this is where the real transformation begins. Because this video isn't about helping you get him back. It is about helping you get yourself back. Stay with me, because the shift I'm about to explain can completely change how you see this entire experience. Sometimes the hardest part of being left for another woman is the feeling that somehow you came in second. It can feel as though there was an invisible competition happening inside his mind and somehow you lost. And let's be honest, that feeling becomes incredibly personal. When a man moves forward quickly or appears happier with someone else, your mind can become a machine for comparison. Was she prettier? Was she more relaxed? Was she funnier? Was she more supportive? Was she more mysterious? Did she understand him better? Did she give him something you couldn't? Those questions can consume you if you allow them to. You can spend hours looking at pictures, reading into his behavior, comparing personalities, and trying to discover the one quality that supposedly made her more valuable than you. But that is exactly where you become trapped, because there may never be one answer. People don't always choose based on who is objectively better. They choose based on what they want, what they fear, what they are ready for, and what they can handle at that moment. And sometimes they choose what feels easier. That distinction matters more than you realize. So stop treating his decision like a final judgment on your worth. It wasn't a competition where she received the trophy and you were defeated. It was a choice made by a human being with his own limitations, desires, insecurities, and emotional patterns. And once you understand that, the question begins to change. Instead of asking, what did she have that I didn't? You can finally begin asking, why was I trying so hard to be chosen by someone who wasn't able to recognize what I brought? Here is another uncomfortable truth that can set you free. People do not always choose what is healthier, deeper, or better for them. Sometimes they choose what is newer. Sometimes they choose what is easier. Sometimes they choose what gives them an immediate emotional rush. And sometimes they choose the person who allows them to avoid looking too closely at themselves. A new relationship can feel exciting because the other person has not seen every flaw yet. There are no old arguments, no difficult conversations, no history of broken promises, no expectations built over time. Everything can feel fresh and effortless because the deeper issues haven't had time to appear. That doesn't automatically mean the new relationship is fake, and it doesn't mean the other woman is somehow inferior. It simply means that what looks perfect from the outside may be an entirely different experience from what you imagine. Sometimes people move towards someone who doesn't challenge them because being challenged requires growth. And growth is uncomfortable. If you were beginning to ask harder questions, establish stronger boundaries, or expect more consistency, he may have felt pressure that he wasn't prepared to handle. You may have been asking him to become more responsible, more honest, more emotionally present, or more intentional. And instead of rising to meet that expectation, he may have chosen to walk away from it. That does not make you demanding. It may simply mean you were becoming more aware of what you needed. Think about that for a moment. Maybe you weren't losing a man who was ready to build with you. Maybe you were losing someone who preferred comfort over growth. Maybe the very things you thought made you difficult were actually signs that your standards were changing. You started questioning behavior you once tolerated. You started noticing patterns you used to excuse. You started realizing that love without respect was not enough. You began wanting consistency instead of promises, effort instead of words, and peace instead of constant uncertainty. And if someone wasn't prepared to meet you there, leaving may have been easier for them than changing. Some people don't want to be called higher. They want to remain exactly where they are because growth demands responsibility. It demands honesty. It demands that a person look at themselves and admit where they have been wrong. Not everyone is ready for that, so they choose the path with less resistance. They choose the environment where they don't have to confront themselves yet. And when that happens, it is easy for you to believe that the other woman must have been the better choice. But what if she was simply a different choice? What if she fit the version of life he was willing to live at that moment? That doesn't make her the winner, and it doesn't make you the loser. There is no scoreboard here. There is only compatibility, timing, emotional readiness, and personal choice. You are not supposed to measure your value against someone else's ability to fit into another person's current limitations. Read that again. You are not competing with her. You are discovering yourself. This is the part that may hurt at first, but eventually it can become the part that frees you. He saw who you were becoming and he chose to walk away. Maybe he didn't understand your growth. Maybe he wasn't prepared for the standards you were beginning to set. Maybe he wanted the version of you who accepted less, stayed quiet, or kept making excuses. And when that version of you started disappearing, the relationship changed. But your growth was never the problem. Your awareness was never the problem. Wanting better for yourself was never something you needed to apologize for. Sometimes people leave when they realize they can no longer receive the same access to you without giving something meaningful in return. And that can feel like rejection, when in reality, it may be a sign that your boundaries are finally working. You don't need to convince him that he made a mistake. You don't need to make him jealous. You don't need to transform yourself just so he notices what he lost. And you certainly don't need to spend your nights checking whether his new relationship is failing. That keeps your attention locked onto a life you are no longer living. Your healing begins when you stop monitoring his choices and start examining your own. What do you want now? What kind of relationship would actually make you feel safe, respected, and valued? What standards did you abandon while trying to keep someone? What parts of yourself became smaller just to make the relationship work? These are the questions that matter now, and here is something you may not expect. The moment you stop trying to understand why she was chosen, you create space to understand why you kept trying to be chosen. That question can take you much deeper. Maybe you were afraid that losing him meant losing your future. Maybe you believed his love was proof that you were valuable. Maybe his attention had become connected to your sense of security. So when he withdrew it, your confidence went with it. But your worth cannot be something another person can give you and then take away. If someone can make you feel valuable one day and worthless the next simply by changing their mind, then your sense of worth was sitting in the wrong hands, and you can take it back, slowly, quietly, completely. You can rebuild the parts of yourself that became dependent on his approval. You can start enjoying your own company again. You can make plans that have nothing to do with whether he comes back. You can take care of your appearance because you enjoy feeling good, not because you want him to regret leaving. You can work on your body because you want strength. You can improve your career because you want freedom. You can build friendships because connection matters. You can create a life so full that his absence is no longer the center of every conversation inside your mind. This is where you stop surviving the breakup and start using it as a turning point. And trust me, this shift is more powerful than trying to prove anything to him. You also need to understand that comparison will never give you peace. Even if you somehow discovered that she was less attractive, less interesting, or less compatible than you, would that really heal you? No. Because your mind would simply find another question. What if he loves her more? What if he treats her better? What if they last forever? What if he never thinks about me again? There will always be another fear waiting if you keep looking outside yourself for reassurance. That's why you have to stop feeding the comparison. You don't need to know what happens in their relationship. You don't need updates. You don't need photographs. You don't need mutual friends reporting every detail. You don't need to decode his social media activity. Every piece of information you collect can become another piece of emotional fuel. Protect your peace. Sometimes healing requires distance from information, not because you are weak, but because you finally understand what your mind needs. And when the urge to compare appears, pause. Tell yourself, her life is not my measurement, his decision is not my identity, my future is still mine. Say it again if you need to, because eventually the words you repeat become the beliefs you live by. And one day you will look back and realize that you spent so much time asking why he chose her that you almost forgot to ask why you weren't choosing yourself. So let him make his choice. Let reality be reality. You don't have to rewrite the past to make yourself feel better, and you don't have to turn him into a villain to move forward. Maybe he had good qualities. Maybe there were beautiful moments. Maybe you genuinely loved him. All of that can be true, and you can still decide that the relationship is no longer where your future belongs. Moving on doesn't mean the memories meant nothing. It means you are no longer willing to sacrifice your present trying to recreate your past. There is a difference, and this is where your strength begins to return. You stop asking, how do I get him to see my value? And start asking, how do I build a life that reflects my value? You stop asking, what does she have? And start asking, what do I want? You stop asking, why wasn't I enough for him? And start saying, I am enough, even when someone doesn't know how to value me. That is clarity. That is freedom. That is the beginning of becoming emotionally unavailable for relationships that require you to abandon yourself. And if you remember nothing else from this entire message, remember this: being replaced is not the same thing as being defeated. Someone choosing another person does not mean another person became more valuable than you. It simply means their paths moved in different directions. Your story is still moving. Your life is still expanding. And the person you are becoming may be stronger, wiser, calmer, and far more selective than the person who once begged to be chosen. The loss may have broken your expectations, but it does not have to break you. Let this be the moment you stop competing, stop comparing, stop chasing, and finally start choosing yourself. Not because you weren't enough, but because you were becoming more than the version of him who refused to grow. That distinction matters. Your growth was never proof that something was wrong with you. It was a reflection of his fear, his limits, and his unwillingness to become better alongside you. And here is another truth people don't always talk about. Sometimes a man chooses chaos because peace feels unfamiliar. When you're secure, steady, honest, and aware of yourself, that kind of stability can feel uncomfortable to someone who has spent years living inside dysfunction. Instead of choosing the calm that could help him grow, he may chase the drama that feels familiar. He may return to patterns that match his past because they don't ask him to change his future. You offered peace, and he simply wasn't prepared to receive it. And if he walked away for surface-level reasons like appearance, status, attention, excitement, or the temporary thrill of something new, then let that decision tell you everything you need to know. Real love isn't built on endless excitement. It is built through trust, consistency, growth, honesty, and emotional depth. If he couldn't recognize the value of that, then he was not prepared to build something lasting with you. You're not here to audition for love. You're not here to make yourself smaller just to become someone's choice. You're here to be aligned with someone who sees your depth and can honestly say, I choose her, even when choosing her requires effort. So no, you didn't lose. He lost someone willing to grow with him, care deeply, and see him for who he truly was. Maybe he won't understand that today. Maybe it won't hit him next week or even next year. But one day, he may look back and finally understand the difference between something that was simply easy and something that was genuinely extraordinary. And by then, you may be so far ahead that his realization no longer changes your life. Keep going, because this is where the deeper part begins. To truly move forward, you have to stop romanticizing his decision and start looking at his mindset with clearer eyes. Not to defend him, not to excuse what he did, but to free yourself from the confusion that keeps pulling you backward. Because sometimes the most painful part isn't simply that he chose another woman, it's that you don't understand why. Your mind keeps searching for the missing explanation. You wonder what happened, what changed, what she offered, and what you supposedly failed to give. So let's look at it differently. Men are not always as complicated as we imagine. Sometimes their decisions come from ego rather than emotional wisdom, impulse rather than intention, or comfort rather than courage. When he chose someone else, it may not have been some carefully planned decision about who was more valuable. It may have been influenced by convenience, validation, timing, fear, or a desire to escape emotional responsibility. A man can sometimes choose what matches how he feels about himself, rather than what reflects the true depth of his feelings for you. If he was insecure, emotionally closed off, or uncomfortable with vulnerability, he may have naturally moved towards someone who required less emotional exposure, someone he could impress without showing his weaknesses, someone who accepted the version of him that felt comfortable, instead of asking him to become the version he needed to become. You may have offered genuine connection, but genuine connection demands honesty. It demands accountability. It demands growth. And if he wasn't prepared for those things, your presence may have felt overwhelming. Not because you were wrong, but because he wasn't ready for what was right. Stay with this part, because once you understand it, the way you see the entire breakup can begin to change. Sometimes a man will chase admiration instead of authenticity. And if you began noticing his patterns, questioning his behavior, removing him from the pedestal where you once placed him, or expecting more consistency, that may have activated something uncomfortable inside him. Instead of growing to meet your standards, he may have looked for someone who still viewed him through the easier version of himself. Someone who hadn't noticed the contradictions yet. Someone who hadn't started asking difficult questions. And there is another layer that matters. Some men are deeply uncomfortable with what they cannot control. If you have a strong sense of self, if you know what you want, if you can stand on your own, and if you don't depend on him to tell you that you're valuable, that independence can feel intimidating to someone who only feels secure when another person needs him. So he may move toward a relationship where he feels more powerful or more necessary. But being needed is not the same thing as being loved. Control is not intimacy. Dependence is not connection. So understand this clearly. His decision was not necessarily about choosing someone better. It may have been about choosing what he could emotionally handle at that stage of his life. What level of self-awareness did he have? What level of maturity had he developed? How much emotional responsibility could he actually carry? Those questions reveal far more than comparing yourself with another woman ever will. This is why closure doesn't have to come from his explanation. Sometimes closure comes when you finally understand that you don't need his explanation to know what his behavior already told you. It is also possible that he genuinely didn't know what he wanted. Some men enter relationships hoping their feelings will eventually become clear. They hope time will make the decision for them. They hope the relationship will somehow repair something broken inside them. They may become involved without having a real direction, believing that everything will simply work itself out. Then, when the relationship becomes serious and requires consistency, vulnerability, or commitment, they begin to pull away. Not necessarily because you did something wrong, but because they never had a clear understanding of what they were prepared to give. When the excitement fades, reality arrives, and reality requires effort. That is where emotionally unprepared people can become uncomfortable. So when you realize that he may have chosen according to his capacity rather than your worth, something important changes inside you. You stop making his confusion your personal failure. You stop chasing explanations that keep you emotionally attached. You stop asking what you could have done differently. And slowly, you begin healing for real. But let's go deeper, because there are reasons behind these choices that can be painful to admit, yet incredibly freeing once you understand them. Don't skip this part. The next realization may explain why you spent so much time believing you were the problem when you were actually asking for things he wasn't ready to provide. Let's stop softening everything and look directly at some of the reasons he may have chosen another woman. Not the comforting stories you tell yourself when you're hurting, and not necessarily the explanations he gave you to make the ending easier. The deeper reasons, the ones that may sting at first but can eventually release you. One common reason is emotional immaturity. He may have been attracted to you. He may have enjoyed being around you. He may have cared about you deeply in the way he knew how. But love without emotional maturity can become chaos. When someone hasn't done the inner work, love can feel overwhelming. Responsibility can feel like pressure. Intimacy can feel like exposure. Vulnerability can feel like losing control. So what does he do? He moves towards something that feels lighter and easier. Someone who doesn't require as much depth, emotional presence, honesty, or personal growth. And here is the difficult part. He may have chosen her because he didn't want to rise to the level you were asking him to reach. You challenged him emotionally, you challenged him mentally, maybe even spiritually. You brought certain truths to the surface that he wasn't ready to face. That does not mean you were too much. It means he was not prepared. Instead of confronting his discomfort, he searched for comfort somewhere else. We often assume someone left because we lack something, but sometimes the opposite is closer to the truth. You may have carried qualities he simply didn't know how to handle: self-respect, boundaries, emotional depth, honesty, independence, and a clear vision for the kind of relationship you wanted. Another possible reason is the need for validation. Some men chase the feeling of being wanted more than they pursue genuine connection. He may have encountered her at a moment when his ego was already hurting. Maybe things between you weren't going smoothly. Maybe you were becoming more distant because you were tired of accepting less. Maybe you were establishing boundaries that made him uncomfortable. Then someone new appeared. She was fresh, she was curious. She didn't know his history, she hadn't seen the habits that had started bothering you. She may have admired him before she had enough information to question him, and suddenly he felt wanted again. That attention could have repaired his ego temporarily. He may not have chosen deeper love. He may have chosen emotional reassurance. He may have chosen the feeling of being admired because it was easier than facing the problems that existed within himself or within your relationship. Then there is timing, but timing is not always what people think it is. It was the wrong time can sometimes be a gentle way of saying, I wasn't willing to become the person I needed to be to meet you where you were. Sometimes people use timing to avoid taking responsibility for their lack of readiness. And sometimes they unconsciously sabotage something meaningful because growth feels more frightening than loss. They choose the easier road and explain it with simple phrases like, "It just wasn't working," or "I didn't feel the same spark anymore." But underneath those words may be a much deeper reality. He wasn't ready to handle the relationship at the level you were beginning to expect. And once you see that, you stop making his timing your personal rejection. Now let's talk about control and power. When a man realizes that you are independent, emotionally grounded, and capable of living your life without depending on him, it can challenge someone who needs to feel in control. If he felt that he couldn't influence you through guilt, distance, attention, or emotional pressure, he may have felt powerless. And some people don't know how to respond to that feeling in a healthy way. Instead of building a relationship based on mutual respect, they look for a dynamic where they feel more needed or more influential. They may seek someone who gives them the illusion of having the upper hand, not because that connection is deeper, but because it makes them feel safer in their own insecurity. There is also another uncomfortable truth. Some people confuse intense chemistry with genuine compatibility. He may have experienced strong passion with her. Maybe there was constant excitement, unpredictability, arguments followed by intense closeness, or a feeling of emotional highs and lows. If he hasn't developed enough emotional maturity, he may mistake that intensity for love. He doesn't recognize that adrenaline eventually fades. He may choose the rush instead of the stability that could actually sustain him, and sometimes the new person simply made him feel chosen. She pursued him, she admired him, she made him feel attractive and important at a moment when he needed that reassurance. In his uncertainty, he may have mistaken her certainty for a sign that the relationship was right. But here's what he may eventually discover. Being wanted by someone doesn't automatically mean you chose wisely. Feeling desired is not the same as finding a healthy connection. So what does all of this mean for you? It means his decision was connected to his capacity, his emotional clarity, his maturity, his fears, and his character. You cannot control who he decided to choose. But you absolutely can control what you decide his choice means about you. You can make it mean that you weren't enough and spend months trying to prove otherwise. Or you can make it mean that this relationship reached a point where your paths were no longer aligned. You weren't necessarily replaced. You may have been redirected away from someone who could not truly recognize your depth and toward a version of yourself that no longer needs to be selected by another person in order to feel valuable. That is a completely different story, and this is where your real transformation begins. The glow up isn't just about your appearance. It isn't just new clothes, better hair, a new routine, or looking happier in photographs. Those things can be part of it, but the deepest transformation happens internally. It is the moment you stop needing him to regret leaving. It is the moment you stop hoping his new relationship fails. It is the moment you stop checking whether he is watching your stories. It is the moment you stop imagining the day he comes back and finally says he made a mistake. Your life becomes powerful when his realization is no longer required for your healing. Keep watching, because there is another part of this story you need to understand. Looking back now, it may feel like his decision happened suddenly. One day everything seemed normal, and then suddenly there was distance, confusion, and eventually another woman. But if you're completely honest with yourself, there were probably signs. Small ones at first, easy to explain away. You called them mood swings, you blamed stressful days, you told yourself he was tired, you assumed it was a communication problem, you gave him the benefit of the doubt again and again. But deep down, you felt something changing. You noticed it in your gut before you could put it into words. His messages became shorter, his replies became slower, the thoughtful conversations became less frequent. Phone calls that once lasted for hours became quick conversations filled with silence. You noticed the change in his attention. You noticed how his face no longer seemed to light up when he saw you. You noticed that he stopped asking about your day, or perhaps even worse, he stopped truly listening when you answered. There were moments when you started feeling like you were too much, too emotional, too sensitive, too demanding, too serious, too deep. And slowly, you began editing yourself to keep the peace. You softened your opinions, you swallowed questions, You avoided difficult conversations. You filtered your feelings because you were afraid that honesty would push him further away. But here's the painful truth. You may have already been losing the relationship long before he officially left, not because you spoke up, not because you asked for more, and not because you suddenly became difficult. You were simply becoming aware of what had already changed. And once you recognized that, the story begins to look very different. You weren't abandoned because you finally asked for too much. You were noticing that you had been accepting too little for too long. You weren't too much, and you weren't the reason everything fell apart. The truth is, he may have already been halfway out of the relationship before you fully realized what was happening. You kept explaining away his inconsistency. One day he was warm, caring, attentive, and completely present, and the next he became distant, distracted, and emotionally unavailable. You told yourself he was stressed, you blamed work, you blamed life. You searched for reasonable explanations because the alternative was painful to accept. But healthy connection doesn't constantly switch between warmth and coldness. Real consistency doesn't disappear whenever things become difficult. What you were witnessing was emotional distance happening right in front of you, and you mistook it for a temporary phase. Think about how often he avoided serious conversations. Whenever you brought up the future, he changed the subject, became defensive, started an argument, or gave you another vague answer like, "Let's not rush anything." He kept you close enough to enjoy your attention, your care, and your presence, but far enough away that he didn't have to take full responsibility for the relationship. You saw that uncertain space and called it potential. You thought maybe, with enough patience, things would finally become clear. But what looked like potential may have actually been emotional limbo. You were waiting for commitment from someone who was comfortable giving you uncertainty, and that waiting slowly drained you. This is important because once you understand the difference between potential and consistency, you stop making excuses for behavior that keeps hurting you. Then there were the subtle comments, the little remarks that seemed harmless at first but slowly chipped away at your confidence. Maybe he made comments about other women. Maybe he brought someone else up just to watch your reaction. Maybe he compared you indirectly, making you feel like you were constantly being measured against someone you couldn't even see. Maybe he acted like he was simply being honest, while his words quietly made you question yourself. Those moments mattered. They weren't necessarily random. Sometimes emotional control doesn't arrive as one huge, obvious action. Sometimes it appears through small comments, mixed signals, jealousy games, and repeated reminders that you could supposedly be replaced. And if you look back honestly, you may also remember what happened whenever you tried to be vulnerable. Instead of listening, he shut down. Instead of comforting you, he became irritated. Instead of trying to understand your feelings, he changed the conversation or somehow made the entire situation about himself. You began wondering whether your emotions were the problem. You started thinking maybe you were asking for too much. But what were you really asking for? To be heard, to be respected, to feel emotionally safe, to have your concerns taken seriously. Those aren't unreasonable demands. Those are basic parts of a healthy connection. And somewhere along the way, you became so focused on keeping him comfortable that you forgot you deserved to feel comfortable too. Stay with me, because this is where you begin to see the relationship through different eyes. Maybe you even felt it before you could explain it. That strange feeling in your stomach, that quiet voice telling you something had changed. You sensed that he was drifting. You noticed the distance in his behavior, the difference in his energy, the way his heart didn't seem fully present anymore. But you loved him. And when you love someone deeply, you don't always want to believe what your intuition is showing you. So you chose denial. You told yourself that if you tried harder, gave more, became more patient, or loved him more carefully, you could somehow repair what was breaking. You thought maybe you could bring back the man you remembered. Maybe if you became softer, more understanding, less demanding, more available, he would return emotionally. But that wasn't your responsibility. A relationship cannot be carried by one person forever. And this isn't weakness on your part, it was hope. You hoped the person you loved would eventually become the person you needed. But hope without boundaries can slowly become self-betrayal. And let's talk about one of the clearest signs of all. You were doing most of the work. You were the one starting conversations. You were the one trying to repair conflict. You were the emotional anchor, the communicator, the peacemaker, the one constantly asking how to make things better. You carried the emotional weight while he simply went along with it. That imbalance was not sustainable. It wasn't partnership, it was survival disguised as romance. The truth is, you probably saw more than you admitted to yourself. You just weren't ready for those signs to mean what they actually meant. Because you loved him, every red flag became something you could explore.